Aloha Hawaii, this is Poka Lainui and you are listening to Hawaiian Potpourri, an opportunity to speak up, speak your mind, and share some of your views with the rest of us. I am Poka, and this is Hawaiian Potpourri, sponsored by the Hawaiian National Broadcast Corporation. And of course, the opinions expressed in this program are not necessarily those of the staff and management of this radio station or of the Hawaiian National Broadcast Corporation. I've had a caller waiting for quite a while, and let's go to that caller, and then we'll come back to our second caller, who will be waiting for a moment. Aloha caller, you're on the air. Welcome to the program.
I'm not really waiting, Poke. I'm just sitting here listening anyway. I was just wanted to add a quick PS to your previous conversation about the international vultures. But the previous caller, the one you just were speaking to, brought the whole subject right back to that point, too. And I think we're looking at the question of loyalty. And people like us have loyalty, if not to organizations or nations, to a core of values, ideas that guide us. And we come from a group that we thought had this, a group of humans that we thought had the same values, live and let live. But we're encountering our own kind that doesn't have that loyalty any longer. And they're the international who will feed on anything to become richer. So they have no loyalty to the things that we think they would have loyalty to. So we say, well, you're breaking the Constitution. Of course they know that. I mean, really. So we're dealing with a group like that, and I think it's very hard to us to understand that, because we're if not forced, harassed into taking the Pledge of Allegiance or all these pledges, these signs of loyalty, and it's not coming back at us. And so I think that could be quite a discussion.
Yeah, and I like the way you've phrased it and focused on it. The question, what is loyalty? Is loyalty merely familiarity and knowing your homeland or knowing your neighbors and your family, or is loyalty dedication to what you call the core values of what we are supposed to be? And now your feedback is overwhelming.
Yes, I wanted to hear more clearly what you were saying. It's a privilege to have a two-way conversation at all.
Yeah, it is.
Yes, go ahead.
So, as I was saying, the question of loyalty and the question of what is it to be an American or a U.S. citizen, is it one's allegiance towards the values by which the United States was eventually created, the values of freedom, of independence, of respect for one another, of caring for one another, and all of those core values, or has the values changed so that core values are towards one's gain, one's personal interest?
Well, I think that's a problem right there, and so that we can see that the dedication to either one excessively is not correct for a group or individual life. That we cannot swing too far either way. We cannot have the group control the individual to the point that they can't think, nor can we have the individual think against the group that nurtured and gave the basis for his being. So we have to have a co-loyalty, and then there's trust, and the trust is gone. So I think we're in trouble. From the way it looks.
Or at least in the current case, or as some people see the direction of the United States being going so far that it violates its own core values, its own initial values that it was created for, and that its only true interest, while it uses the words of liberty and justice, but its true interest is just to maximize the profits of certain interests, major corporation interests. Is it not then time to destroy that entity which allows this to breed?
Well, that's a question of whether that's possible from, I don't know if I'm intruding or not because I can hardly hear you, but whether that's a question of can they do it or not, or is it a question of moving to the point where the citizens themselves see this and they begin to look at it as an occupied group and realize that they're being treated the same way, and I think that awareness is increasing because this isn't my idea. It's out there too, so it's not something that just blossomed suddenly in my head. It's just that I was ready and willing to accept it and think, yes, exactly, that's what's happened.
Yeah.
So I think that that's a question of an internal struggle, and I don't know if there's any external force that's strong enough to interfere and deal with that.
Yeah, I think it's already been seen. One, the internal struggle is as a sign of the internal struggle, occupation.
Oh, yes, definitely, definitely. And, of course, when it manifests itself like that, it has side paths leading in it to its side supports that are there, too. It's not just a weed that suddenly shot up in the field.
Yeah.
And so the government knows that, and that's the reason for this fight now about surveillance and all this stuff that's coming out about how the population is again being looked at as an occupied colony. I mean, really, it's so big that it can hardly be spoken about.
Yeah. In terms of external forces, I'm seeing the external forces as the rise of other countries which are now very directly confronting the United States on the economic front, on the cultural front, even on the military front, to have Iran say that we are not simply going to give in, and if it means you're going to attempt to attack us, we will respond.
Yes.
Yeah.
That would be a repetition of historical things, but I don't know if this is different in that it is now a global move towards one government, and that would not really happen under this picture. I don't know. It's just a new idea that...
I think the global move towards one government occurred maybe about, 15 to 20 years ago with the fall of the Soviet Union and the fall of, quote,
Can you
communism.
Can you speak louder?
Oh, okay, let me try. With the fall of the Soviet Union and the fall of the concept of communism, of course, China continues to call itself a communist country. But when the United States then became the super-duper power and there was no one else to challenge it, then there was that fear of the singular government, but all under the head of the United States. Now we are finding that the United States have exhausted its force, its power, abusing the potential that it has, and one of the potential, or one of the moments when it was at its height was just prior to the 9/11 event, and gaining so much support throughout the world about the atrocities of 9/11, and then turning all of that into rubbish, essentially. So that the countries then started looking at the United States and saying, why the invasion in Iraq? Why the invasion in Afghanistan? And then these policies under the Bush administration. Even within the United States, you had people who originally supported being carried away by emotions and then later on catching themselves and saying, yes, but it still wasn't right because they weren't the country that, there's no proof that they were the country who attacked the United States. So that the whole story, while it was in its, reaching its peak, it has fallen, and now you're finding the collapse of this empire. So it's a very interesting and strange drama that is now taking place. With little people such as us here in Hawaii, we're sitting back, not sitting back, but we're sitting on the sidelines watching these things occur internationally as well as within the belly of the beast, as many of us call it. And at the same time having our own interest to want to see the empire fall so that we can take our place among nations. And of course, as Galtung says, after the fall of the American Empire, the United States will actually be a much better country because it would learn how to be good neighbors with others. And so there's still that hopefulness that we hear from these radicals such as Johann and such as myself and others. It's not doom and gloom, but let's try to make a better society than we have.
Well, Poca, yes, this is very hopeful. All I can say is don't get hit by the rafters as it falls. Okay, thanks.
Thanks for calling.
Okay, bye-bye.
Take care. Aloha. And if you'd like to join in this conversation, this is really a meandering conversation. You're welcome to call. Telephone number here is 524-1080. The time now is 7:44 on Sunday morning, Easter Sunday. Let's go to our next caller. Aloha caller. Thank you for waiting. Welcome to the program.
Hey!
Yes.
Aloha!
Again. Yes.
Oh, me again.
Yeah, you again. But welcome.
Thank you for that time travel into the intellect world. What a beautiful discussion.
Thank you.
You know, people don't realize the utopia of slavery is the one that thinks that they are free. No need chains, no need shackles, no need dogs. Keeping you intact, yeah. On it, but Queen look, brother, and call in about serving country, yeah. Having this allegiance, yeah.
Yeah.
And the funny thing about it is when Hawaiian nationals try to tell them, for the past 119 years, that we are here. We never left, yeah. And they said, "Oh, you sit down, yeah. Sit down, shut up." Yeah. Yeah. And Queen Lilo, the Queen mentioned about the love of country. Yeah, is no matter what station you are, no matter what your rank is. Yeah. Yeah. The love of country is embedded in the breasts of all people. Yeah. Something to that anyway. Yeah. I called earlier and I mentioned about the Obamacare. Yeah. I'd like to do this real quick, I know you're running out of time. Okay. This article, as I mentioned, is in newswithviews.com. Okay. Newswithviews.com. Okay. And the author is Betty, I believe it's pronounced Freauf. It's spelled F-R-E-A-U-F. And basically, House Resolution 32 is Obamacare, yeah? Okay. Which means that basically March 23, 2013, it will take effect, yeah? And when it takes effect, the RFID implants are due in 3 years after the bill takes effect. So, in other words, 2016. On it. So it's an interesting article, basically. Let's leave that discussion there. Give me some time to review and go into the... Yes, certainly. Yeah, when I just wanted for you guys to know where it's at, yeah? Okay, the news with views. Is the with spelled out W-I-T-H or just W/? With views, basically, is one word. News with views. Okay, it's spelled out. Okay. Okay, VIEWS, yeah, .com. Okay. The article is by Betty Freauf. Yes. Okay, we'll check that out. And I'm sorry to say this, but maybe this will turn people off not reading the article, because the article is titled, "The Last Recorded Miracle of Jesus." Okay. All right. Don't let the title kick you in the butt. All okay, right. Let's leave that aside. Thanks for calling. Yeah. Okay, brother. Take care. Aloha. Okay, we do have two more callers, and we'll take them in the order that they came in. Aloha caller, thank you for waiting. Welcome to the program.
Hello, Polka. Yes. This is Michael. Good morning.
Yes, good morning, Michael.
Listen, I'm listening with interest in today's show and talking about the various injustices in Burma. And what I'm resonating with is the injustices here in Hawaii with the continued illegal occupation of this land. Given the complex and multitude of injustices, that are ensuing in our society. I wonder if you had any, as I see it, we need mass mobilization of people who share the principles that the sister talked about earlier, and to have direct action that includes acts of civil disobedience that in some ways are representative of the civil rights movement of the 60s and 70s in order for us to create new ways of thinking and change. I wonder what your views on the occupation movement is around the country, and I can probably take this off air.
Okay, all right. Thanks for calling, Michael, and it was good to see you yesterday. My view with regards to the occupation movement and the need for massive action, it has always been my view that before action can be effective, you need the planning, you need the analysis for that action. And rather than having just a few people engage in that planning so that you have a sort of the head or a special committee, my view is that it is best to share the planning in a broadcast rather than in a narrow-casted way. And so some of you may now see that I am revealing at least my work in trying to broadcast these discussions, these analysis, so that when the action actually takes place, the analysis have already been done, and the action will not stop with the knocking off of one or another leader of that movement, because the movement now becomes a mass movement. So it's not merely calling for a mass movement, but it's calling for a mass movement that has a clear purpose behind the movement. I support the Occupied movement in that it was a very effective mass movement. I have some concerns of it because I do not believe that the analysis has been clear enough and the voices have been clear enough. So to simply say that we are angry, we are mad, we don't like the idea of the 1%ers getting all of the profits of the rest of us, to me is not an adequate analysis of what needs to be said. While I agree that there should be a fair distribution of responsibilities as well as assets within a community, there also needs to be many other things that should be looked at, such as the legitimacy of the assets that are being shared, and so many other things, and that I did not see and have not seen in the Occupied movement. Okay. Now, I know this is very quick response to, Michael, your question. I hope it's at least sufficient to alleviate or to address some of your immediate questions and concerns. Okay, let's go to our next caller, and I recognize that we have two callers on right now, but we'll go to our next caller. Aloha caller, welcome to the program.
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning.
I know you only go at 10 minutes, but I want to get back to the occupation story. Now, as a Keko Oka'aina, I think I would rather, I'm happy that we have been occupied by the United States of America, because if you remember in that period of December 7th, 1941, if the Japanese had taken over had taken over this island and without the protection of the United States armed forces, military, and their might. To this day, I believe you and I, Polka, we'd be working in the rice fields for 12 hours. There won't be any, it'd be growing rice instead of kalo. All our young wahinis would not be dancing in the halahas at the Marimonic Festival. They'd be working in the Brussels comfort stations, servicing the Japanese soldiers, maybe 10 or 20 a day. This is what the difference of who occupies this island, and I just want to repeat, if we were not protected by the United States of America, we'd be speaking Japanese and working 12 hours a day in the right fields. And that is my comment about the occupiers.
Okay.
And people forget. There's people on this island who have short memories, even in regards to local politics, which legislature, which I do not want to get to since the time is so short.
Okay.
Maybe you could comment on that.
Okay, I will.
We should be occupied as Japan or United States.
Okay, thank you very much for your call and for holding on to make that statement, and I recognize and appreciate your holding on. I understand your statement. Essentially, you're a happy occupier. I think that's what you had called yourself. And I had written down another statement from an earlier caller, and he was talking about the state of utopia for slaves is to believe that you are indeed free. How is it that a slave will believe that he is free? How is it that an occupier becomes a happy, not occupier, a happy occupied person becomes a happy occupied person? And that is as a result of propaganda. That is a result of the stories that we are told and a belief system that we adapt to or adopt because we are not well informed. For a slave person, he doesn't really understand the breath of freedom, the true breath of freedom, and instead is told the story by the slave master of how wonderful we treat you as slaves. We take care of your health. You don't have any. We send a doctor down to the plantation once a month, and it's free. And when you have babies, then we make sure that the babies are healthy because, of course, we share the same interest that you have. We cannot have good slaves if the babies are not healthy. We need healthy slaves. And so it makes the slave owner very thankful, very healthy. It's part of this syndrome. If we believe in freedom, there is no such thing as happy slaves or happy occupied people because it's a very contradiction. So if you're willing to trade your freedom away for a lesser intensive occupation, but still an occupation, which is what the last caller has essentially said, then it is not freedom. It's being or choosing between, the frying pan or the fire. And that choice, of course, can be made. You can say, well, the frying pan is less hot than the fire. But the other option of independence, of being away from these kinds of conditions, which is your essential right to be, is not opened up as an opportunity. So you see how the discussion then becomes limited to only would you prefer being occupied by the Japanese rather than occupied by the Americans? And having your brothels and your women serving the Japanese soldiers as prostitutes? Serving 20 men in a day, but leaving out the other side of all the prostitutions that were occurring during the American occupation during that war period of time on Hotel Street, and closing your eyes as to that. And then just going along with the concept that the Japanese attack was against Hawaii. There is another view that the Japanese attack was against the U.S. military who was stationed in Hawaii. And it was out of Hawaii military that was being sent to stop the Japanese from their getting oil in Indonesia, and essentially to hassle the Japanese, to choke them off so the Japanese would die off without the oil. And as a result, the attack here in Hawaii, not against the Hawaiians. Of course, there was one or two Hawaiian who died or had to confront Japanese, but essentially it was against the U.S. military here in Hawaii. Okay. I know there's much more to explore on this issue. I want to thank all of you, every one of your callers, for joining in our program this morning.
Kau nanapua o Hawaii Kupa ama hope o ka aina Iki mai ka elele o ka loko ino Pala pala anunu me ka paka Pane mai Hawaii moku o ke ave Koku ana honoa o Pilani Ka ko'o mai kaua i o mano Pa'apu me ke one o ka kuhi hewa Aolea e kau i ka pulima Maluna o ka pepa o ka enemi Po o hui ai nā ku ai hewa I ka pono si